Lawrence Thompson clutches his screaming 6-month-old daughter Zara, her tiny arm blistering from the scalding coffee. The flight attendant Brittany smirks, whispering to her colleague. Neither notices Supreme Court Justice Eleanor Freeman watching from first class, her phone recording everything. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed injustice that needed to be exposed. Sometimes the most powerful people are watching when we least expect it. Dr. Lawrence Thompson checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The security line at Atlanta International Airport stretched ahead of him, seemingly endless. At 38, the respected cardiothoracic surgeon was accustomed to pressure, but traveling alone with 6-month-old Zara added a new dimension of stress. He adjusted the baby carrier where his daughter slept peacefully against his chest, her tiny fingers curled into fists. "It's just you and me now, little one," he whispered, feeling the familiar pang of grief that had become his constant companion. Only 7 months ago, his wife Tanya had died from complications during childbirth. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Lawrence. He had saved countless lives in the operating room but couldn't save the woman he loved most. This trip to San Francisco marked Zara's first meeting with her maternal grandparents. Robert and Lillian Hayes had been too devastated by their daughter's death to travel to Atlanta for the funeral, much less to meet their granddaughter. The tension between Lawrence and his in-laws had been growing, with unspoken accusations hanging in the air during their brief phone conversations. This visit was his attempt to bridge that gap, to give Zara the chance to know her mother's family. Next, called the TSA agent, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes. Lawrence approached, carefully balancing Zara and their documents. The agent's expression shifted subtly when she looked up at him. "Traveling alone with an infant?" Her tone carried a note of suspicion. "Yes, visiting family in San Francisco," Lawrence replied pleasantly, used to masking his reactions to such microaggressions. "I'll need to see additional identification for both of you," she said, scrutinizing his driver's license and Zara's birth certificate longer than necessary. Lawrence noticed the white couple ahead of him had passed through with a cursory glance at their documents, despite also traveling with a child. He maintained his composure, aware of the eyes on him. His colleague Dr. Wilson had once told him, "You'll always have to be twice as good to get half the credit," and Lawrence had found this to be unfailingly true throughout his career. After an additional, random, pat-down and thorough inspection of the baby formula in his carry-on, Lawrence finally made his way to the gate. Boarding had already begun when he arrived, slightly flustered but determined to remain positive. "Zone 4 hasn't been called yet," snapped flight attendant Brittany Wells before Lawrence could even speak. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, her makeup impeccable. She barely glanced at his boarding pass. "I understand," Lawrence replied calmly. "I was hoping for pre-boarding with an infant." He gestured to Zara, who was beginning to stir. Brittany's lips thinned. "You should have arrived earlier. You'll have to wait." Just then, a white woman with a toddler approached. Without checking her boarding pass, Brittany smiled warmly. "Of course you can board now, ma'am. Let me help you with that stroller." Lawrence felt the familiar burn of indignation but kept his expression neutral. Throughout his life, from elite medical school to his prestigious position at Atlanta Memorial, he had learned to navigate these waters carefully. Make waves, and you're labeled difficult or aggressive. Stay silent, and you enable the behavior to continue. When Zone 4 was finally called, Lawrence boarded efficiently, settling into his economy seat with practiced ease. He arranged Zara's essentials within reach: diapers, wipes, formula, and her favorite stuffed elephant. The flight to San Francisco would take over 5 hours, and he needed to be prepared. As other passengers boarded, Lawrence noticed an elderly white woman in first class watching him with interest. With her silver hair and elegant attire, she had a distinguished air about her. For a moment, their eyes met, and she offered a slight nod. Lawrence nodded back politely before turning his attention to Zara, who was miraculously still calm despite the commotion around them. The memories of Tanya flooded back as the plane prepared for takeoff. She had been so excited about becoming a mother, decorating the nursery with constellation decals because she believed their daughter would reach for the stars. Now Lawrence was left wondering how to fulfill those dreams alone, how to protect Zara in a world that would judge her by the color of her skin before knowing the content of her character. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Lawrence whispered to Zara, "Your mom would be so proud of you, little star." To his relief, Zara remained peaceful throughout takeoff, her eyes wide with wonder at the new sensations. In first class, Eleanor Freeman observed the interaction between the young father and his infant daughter. At 72, the Supreme Court justice had seen significant changes in American society throughout her career, yet she was acutely aware of how much remained unchanged. She had boarded early, deliberately choosing a seat with a good view of the cabin. Her current research on transportation discrimination would benefit from real-world observations, though she hadn't expected to witness anything significant on this routine flight. Lawrence settled in for the long journey, unaware that the woman in first class would soon become an unexpected ally in one of the most challenging moments of his life. An hour into the flight, Zara began to fuss. Lawrence recognized the early signs of hunger, her little face scrunching up, tiny fists waving. He reached for the prepared bottle in the diaper bag, only to find it had cooled completely. "It's okay, sweetie," he soothed, bouncing her gently while scanning the aisle for assistance. Flight attendant Brittany Wells was serving drinks several rows ahead, laughing with passengers as she worked. Lawrence waited patiently for her to reach his row. When Brittany finally approached, Lawrence spoke softly to avoid disturbing other passengers. "Excuse me, could you please warm this bottle for my daughter?" Brittany's smile vanished. She glanced at the bottle, then at Zara, whose fussing was growing louder. "I'm in the middle of beverage service," she replied curtly. "I understand," Lawrence said. "But she's hungry, and it will just take a minute to warm." With a theatrical sigh, Brittany took the bottle. "I'll get to it when I can." She continued serving other passengers, including a white businessman who made a special drink request that she cheerfully accommodated. From her vantage point in first class, Eleanor Freeman observed the interaction with interest. She had been watching the young father since boarding, impressed by his gentle patience with his infant. The flight attendant's dismissive attitude caught her attention. Eleanor took out a small notebook and began making discreet notes. 15 minutes passed before Brittany returned with the warmed bottle. By then, Zara's fussing had escalated to full-blown crying, drawing annoyed glances from nearby passengers. "Here," Brittany thrust the bottle at Lawrence. "You really should try to control your child better. Other passengers are trying to relax." Her voice carried deliberately, ensuring those around could hear. "Thank you," Lawrence replied evenly, though his jaw tightened. He tested the milk temperature on his wrist. Barely lukewarm. It would have to do. He offered the bottle to Zara, who accepted it eagerly despite its inadequate temperature. As Brittany walked away, Lawrence overheard her muttering to her colleague, a male flight attendant named Cameron. "These people never know how to travel with children. Always expecting special treatment." The comment stung, but Lawrence focused on Zara. He'd faced similar situations throughout his career. Patients requesting different doctors upon seeing he was black, nurses questioning his orders despite his seniority, security guards following him in the hospital when he wore casual clothes instead of his white coat. His mentor, Dr. Phillips, had advised him early in his career, "Save your battles for the ones that matter most." The passengers around Lawrence displayed mixed reactions. An elderly woman across the aisle shot Brittany a disapproving look, while a businessman in the row ahead loudly complained about crying babies on planes. Eleanor Freeman had seen enough. She quietly gathered her belongings and approached a flight attendant at the front of the cabin. After a brief conversation, she was escorted to an empty seat closer to economy class, ostensibly due to a temperature issue with her original seat. Now positioned where she could better observe, Eleanor pretended to read while keeping a watchful eye on the situation unfolding. Lawrence managed to calm Zara, who drifted off to sleep after finishing her bottle. He gazed at her peaceful face, seeing echoes of Tanya in her features. His wife had been his anchor, his passionate defender. When they'd faced discrimination together, like being seated near the kitchen at an upscale restaurant despite having reservations. Tanya had been the one to speak up while Lawrence preferred to avoid confrontation. Not making waves doesn't make the water less dangerous, she would tell him. It just means you're choosing to drown quietly. The captain's voice interrupted Lawrence's thoughts, announcing upcoming turbulence and requesting all passengers to return to their seats with seatbelts fastened. Lawrence silently thanked the timing. Zara was finally sleeping soundly, and he desperately needed a moment of respite himself. 2 hours into the flight, the turbulence subsided, leaving a cabin full of restless passengers. Lawrence exhaled slowly, grateful that Zara had remained asleep through the bumpy air. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of countless sleepless nights since becoming a single father. Being both mother and father to Zara while maintaining his surgical practice had pushed him to his limits. The distinctive aroma of coffee filled the cabin as the beverage service resumed. Lawrence watched as Brittany methodically worked her way from first class to economy, serving passengers with varying degrees of warmth depending on who was receiving her attention. When she reached Lawrence's row, Brittany was engrossed in conversation with Cameron, laughing about weekend plans. She carelessly poured coffee while looking at her colleague instead of the cup. In an instant, scalding liquid splashed over the armrest and onto Zara's exposed arm. The infant's peaceful sleep erupted into agonized screams that pierced the cabin. Lawrence reacted instantly, years of medical training kicking in as he assessed the situation. Cold water. I need cold water and ice now, he commanded, already removing Zara's soaked sleeve to prevent further burning. Brittany's reaction was shockingly casual. Accidents happen, she said with a barely concealed smirk. She made no move to help, continuing to serve coffee to the next row as if a baby wasn't screaming in pain. My daughter is burned. I need medical supplies immediately. Lawrence's voice rose with urgency, his doctor's instincts overriding his usual restraint. Sir, you need to calm down, Brittany replied coldly. Your baby was moving around. Maybe you should have been more careful. A white woman in the adjacent seat, horrified by what she'd witnessed, thrust her napkins toward Lawrence. That wasn't your fault at all. I saw everything. Lawrence pressed the call button repeatedly while cradling Zara, whose screams had intensified. His mind raced through burn treatment protocols: cool the area, prevent infection, manage pain. The angry red mark spreading across his daughter's tiny arm indicated a potential second-degree burn. What Lawrence didn't notice was Eleanor Freeman rising from her seat, phone discreetly positioned to record the scene unfolding. The distinguished older woman approached with purpose, her expression grave. Brittany finally returned with a few napkins and a cup of tap water. This is all we have, she stated flatly, her tone suggesting Lawrence was causing an unnecessary disruption. That's not adequate for a burn, Lawrence insisted, his professional knowledge clashing with Brittany's deliberate indifference. I need the first aid kit. As a physician, I can tell you this requires immediate proper treatment. A physician? Sure. Brittany's skepticism was evident in her tone. The implication was clear, she didn't believe a black man could be a doctor. I'll check if the first aid kit is available, but we're very busy right now. As Lawrence continued treating Zara with the limited supplies available, memories surfaced of a similar dismissal at his hospital. A patient had suffered complications because a nurse didn't believe Lawrence's urgent order was necessary, questioning his judgment despite his position as department head. When he'd raised the issue with administration, he was advised to let it go for the sake of workplace harmony. Now, watching his daughter suffer while a flight attendant deliberately delayed proper care, Lawrence felt rage building beneath his professional exterior. Zara's cries had become whimpers, her tiny body shuddering with each breath, the burn on her arm forming an angry blister. Have you ever witnessed such blatant negligence from someone in a position of responsibility? Comment number 1 if you believe Lawrence should file formal charges against the flight attendant, or number 2 if you think he should focus solely on getting proper medical care for Zara. Like and subscribe if you've ever had to maintain composure in the face of injustice. What would you do if someone harmed your child and showed no remorse? The situation is about to take an unexpected turn. Excuse me, I believe I can help. The authoritative voice came from Eleanor Freeman, who now stood in the aisle beside Lawrence's seat. I was a nurse before my legal career, she explained, not yet revealing her current position as a Supreme Court justice. Lawrence looked up gratefully, still focusing on comforting Zara. She has a second-degree burn. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon, but I need proper supplies. Eleanor nodded, turning to Brittany who had returned to observe the commotion. The aircraft's first aid kit should contain burn gel with lidocaine, sterile dressings, and appropriate pain relief. Please bring it immediately. Her tone left no room for argument. Brittany hesitated, clearly assessing Eleanor's expensive clothing and commanding presence. We don't typically open the medical kit unless absolutely necessary. This is absolutely necessary, Eleanor interrupted. This child has a serious burn that requires immediate treatment. Bring the kit now, or I'll need to speak with your captain about the airline's emergency response protocols. Something in Eleanor's demeanor caused Brittany to reconsider her resistance. I'll check with the lead flight attendant, she muttered before hurrying away. Eleanor turned her attention to Lawrence and Zara. May I? She asked, gesturing toward the injured arm. Lawrence nodded, recognizing the confident assessment of someone with medical training. I'm Lawrence Thompson. This is my daughter Zara. Eleanor Freeman, she replied simply, examining the burn with a practiced eye. You're doing exactly the right things, Dr. Thompson. Keep the area cool but not cold. We'll need to protect it from infection once we have proper supplies. They discussed treatment options with professional efficiency, establishing a rapport based on mutual respect. Lawrence noticed how Eleanor anticipated his medical concerns, asking pointed questions about Zara's pain level and whether she had any allergies to medications. Brittany returned with Mitchell, the lead flight attendant, a balding man with a practiced customer service smile. The first aid kit was conspicuously absent. I understand there's been an incident, Mitchell began smoothly. Brittany explains that there was an unfortunate accident during beverage service. It was no accident, interjected the woman seated near Lawrence. I watched that flight attendant pour coffee without even looking, and then she smirked when it spilled on the baby. Mitchell's smile didn't waver. We take all passenger concerns seriously. I can assure you that Brittany is one of our most experienced crew members. Brittany stood slightly behind Mitchell, her expression smug until she noticed Eleanor taking notes and occasionally glancing at her phone. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Where is the first aid kit? Eleanor asked directly. I'm sure we can resolve this without, Mitchell began. This child has a second-degree burn that requires immediate medical attention, Eleanor stated firmly. As both a medical professional and a legal expert, I'm formally requesting the aircraft's medical kit, as required by FAA regulations. The mention of regulations and Eleanor's confident demeanor caused Mitchell to reassess the situation. I'll get it right away, he conceded. While Mitchell was gone, Brittany attempted to control the narrative. These things happen during turbulence. I'm sure Dr. Thompson understands the challenges of serving beverages on an aircraft. Her emphasis on Lawrence's title carried a note of disbelief. I understand the difference between an accident and negligence, Lawrence replied calmly, though his eyes conveyed his anger. And I understand when someone shows no remorse for injuring a child. Eleanor continued observing the interaction closely. Dr. Thompson, were you and Zara properly secured in your seats when this occurred? Yes, the seatbelt sign had just turned off. Zara was sleeping in my arms, completely still when the coffee was poured. Cameron, who had witnessed everything, shifted uncomfortably nearby. His eyes met Lawrence's briefly, conveying an unspoken apology. Mitchell returned with the medical kit, which Eleanor and Lawrence immediately opened. Working together, they applied burn gel to Zara's injury and properly dressed the wound. The child's cries subsided as the medication took effect. "I'll need an incident report filed," Lawrence stated once Zara was more comfortable. "I want documentation of exactly what happened and the delay in treatment." Mitchell's smile tightened. "I'm sure that won't be necessary. The airline would be happy to offer you a voucher for a future flight." "I don't want a voucher," Lawrence replied. "I want accountability." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Lawrence's shoulder. "Dr. Thompson, if I may." She turned to Mitchell and Brittany. "I've been observing Ms. Wells's behavior since boarding. I've documented multiple instances of differential treatment based on passengers' race, culminating in this injury to an infant and the subsequent reluctance to provide appropriate medical care." Mitchell's customer service facade cracked slightly. "And you are?" Eleanor straightened to her full height. "Justice Eleanor Freeman, United States Supreme Court." The effect was immediate. Mitchell paled visibly while Brittany's smug expression dissolved into shock. Other passengers who overheard murmured in surprise. "Justice Freeman," Mitchell stammered. "We had no idea you were aboard. I assure you that our airline takes discrimination allegations extremely seriously." "I'm not concerned with your assurances," Eleanor replied evenly. "I'm concerned with actions. This child needs proper medical attention, and Dr. Thompson deserves full documentation of this incident without being offered hush money in the form of travel vouchers." The power dynamic had shifted completely. Mitchell hurried to prepare an incident report while other flight attendants suddenly appeared, offering Lawrence anything he might need for Zara's comfort. Lawrence, still processing Eleanor's revelation, focused on monitoring Zara's condition. His daughter had finally calmed, the pain medication providing relief. He gently stroked her uninjured arm, whispering reassurances. "Justice Freeman," he said quietly, "thank you for stepping in." Eleanor nodded. "I've spent my career addressing systemic injustice, Dr. Thompson. Sometimes it manifests in court cases, and sometimes it happens right before our eyes at 30,000 feet. Lawrence thought of his father's advice years ago, always document everything. Your word against theirs will never be enough. Now, with a Supreme Court justice as witness, perhaps accountability was possible." The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed. Mitchell hovered nervously, filling out incident reports with meticulous care now that he understood who was watching. Brittany had been relegated to the galley, kept away from passengers while Cameron had taken over her duties. "We've contacted our ground team in Denver," Mitchell informed Lawrence and Eleanor. "They'll have medical personnel ready when we land. We can arrange for you to be first off the aircraft, Dr. Thompson." Lawrence looked down at Zara, who had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, her injured arm carefully bandaged. "What I want is for my daughter to receive proper medical evaluation at a hospital, not just by airport staff." Of course," Mitchell agreed hastily. "We'll arrange transportation to the nearest children's hospital. At the airline's expense, naturally." Eleanor observed this exchange with a measured gaze. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm curious about your airline's protocols for addressing in-flight medical emergencies, particularly those caused by crew members." Mitchell tugged at his collar. "We have comprehensive procedures, Justice Freeman. All documented in our operations manual. Including response times for accessing medical supplies." Eleanor pressed. "Absolutely. Our standard is immediate access when requested by medical professionals or in clear emergencies." Eleanor made another note. "Interesting. Because I timed approximately 17 minutes between Dr. Thompson's initial request and your arrival with the first aid kit. Would you say that meets your immediate access standard?" Mitchell's professional veneer cracked further. "There may have been some miscommunication about the severity of the situation." "Miscommunication," Eleanor repeated, letting the word hang in the air. I'll be interested to review the airline's training materials regarding recognition of second-degree burns as emergencies. From the galley, Brittany watched the conversation with growing alarm. Her confident dismissiveness had vanished entirely, replaced by the dawning realization that her actions might have serious consequences. She whispered urgently to another flight attendant, who shook her head and moved away, clearly wanting no association with the situation. Lawrence adjusted Zara's position to ensure her comfort, his mind racing with concerns about long-term scarring and the psychological impact of the trauma. He thought about the countless small aggressions he had let slide throughout his life and career, the security guards who followed him in department stores, the patients who questioned his credentials, the neighbors who called police when he jogged through his own upscale neighborhood. He had always chosen his battles carefully, focusing on his career and, more recently, on creating a stable life for Zara. "Dr. Thompson," Eleanor said quietly, "may I ask what your plans are once we land?" Lawrence considered the question. "Get Zara proper medical treatment. Document everything. Beyond that." He paused. "I'm not sure yet." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "I'm currently researching patterns of discrimination in transportation services for an upcoming opinion. What happened today is unfortunately not isolated." Their conversation was interrupted by Cameron, who approached cautiously. "Dr. Thompson, I want to apologize for what happened. I should have spoken up sooner." He glanced nervously toward the galley where Brittany was still sequestered. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened." "What do you mean?" Lawrence asked. Cameron lowered his voice. "Brittany transferred from another airline 6 months ago after similar complaints. She's been selective about which passengers receive proper service. Several of us have noticed." Eleanor's interest sharpened. "Mr. Cameron Davis, ma'am." "Justice Freeman," he corrected himself. "Mr. Davis, would you be willing to provide a formal statement about these patterns of behavior?" Cameron hesitated, clearly weighing his job security against his conscience. Yes. It's not right what happened to Dr. Thompson's daughter." The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their imminent descent into Denver for an unscheduled landing due to a medical situation. The announcement sent another ripple of activity through the cabin as passengers speculated about the nature of the emergency. Mitchell returned with a stack of forms. "Dr. Thompson, if you could just sign these acknowledgments of the care provided." Lawrence reviewed the documents with professional scrutiny. "This states that appropriate medical care was provided in a timely manner." "That's not accurate." "It's standard language," Mitchell explained weakly. "It's not what happened," Lawrence countered, handing the forms back and signed. "I'll document exactly what occurred and what care was provided, including the timeline." Eleanor smiled slightly, impressed with Lawrence's attention to detail under pressure. Dr. Thompson is correct to insist on accuracy. I'm sure your legal department would prefer to avoid documenting falsehoods." Mitchell reluctantly nodded, taking back the forms. "I'll have these revised before landing." As the plane began its descent into Denver, Lawrence received a message on his phone. News about their unscheduled landing was already circulating on social media, with mentions of a Supreme Court justice's involvement. The airline's corporate communications team had been activated, and executives were scrambling to respond. Brittany emerged briefly from the galley, her face tense as she observed the activity surrounding Lawrence and Eleanor. When she caught Lawrence looking in her direction, she quickly averted her gaze and disappeared again. Lawrence thought about Tanya and what she would do in this situation. She had been fearless in confronting injustice, whether it affected her directly or others. "Use your voice," she would tell him. "Especially when others can't use theirs." As the plane touched down in Denver, Lawrence made his decision. This wasn't just about a cup of spilled coffee or even about Zara's injury. It was about the countless similar incidents that happened every day without Supreme Court justices present to witness them. It was about Zara growing up in a world where such treatment was normalized. When the plane taxied to the gate, Lawrence noticed the unusual number of airline representatives waiting on the jetway. Word had clearly spread about who was on board and what had transpired. "Justice Freeman," he said quietly as they prepared to deplane, "thank you for being here today." Eleanor regarded him thoughtfully. "Dr. Thompson, sometimes justice requires being in the right place at the right time. But more often, it requires people willing to stand up when injustice occurs, regardless of who's watching." With Zara cradled protectively in his arms, Lawrence nodded. "I think I'm ready to stand up." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Paramedics met the plane, examining Zara before transferring her and Lawrence to Denver Children's Hospital. Eleanor accompanied them, using her considerable influence to ensure they received immediate attention. Hospital staff confirmed Lawrence's assessment. Zara had suffered a second-degree burn that, while not life-threatening, required proper treatment and monitoring. Now, with Zara resting comfortably in a private room, Lawrence and Eleanor had a moment to speak openly. The hospital had provided a quiet consultation room where they could talk without disturbing Zara, who was finally sleeping peacefully under the watchful eye of a pediatric nurse. "I've been researching transportation discrimination for an upcoming case," Eleanor explained, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to weighing her words carefully. "Airlines, ride shares, taxis, all show disturbing patterns of differential treatment." Lawrence nodded, unsurprised. "I've experienced it throughout my life. Usually in subtle ways that are easy for others to dismiss." "Nothing subtle about what happened today," Eleanor observed. "No," Lawrence agreed. "But without you there, it would have been my word against hers." Another misunderstanding swept under the rug. Eleanor studied Lawrence thoughtfully. "You mentioned you're a cardiothoracic surgeon. Where did you train?" "Johns Hopkins for medical school, then Mayo for my residency. I've been at Atlanta Memorial for 8 years now, heading the department for the last 3. Eleanor's eyebrows rose with genuine appreciation. "Impressive credentials." "My father cleaned office buildings at night so I could attend good schools," Lawrence said quietly. "He always told me education was the one thing they couldn't take away from me." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." Lawrence's expression softened with memory. "He didn't live to see me graduate medical school." A comfortable silence fell between them, two professionals who had navigated systems not designed for their success. "You mentioned you were a nurse before your legal career?" Lawrence asked eventually. Eleanor nodded. "For 12 years. I worked in emergency medicine while attending law school at night." A slight smile touched her lips. "Actually, I knew your wife." Lawrence's head snapped up. "You knew Tanya?" "Not well," Eleanor clarified. "She argued a case before the court 2 years ago. Healthcare access for underserved communities. Brilliant attorney. I was very sorry to hear of her passing." Lawrence felt the familiar tightness in his chest that accompanied any mention of Tanya. "She would have appreciated your intervention today." "Tell me about her," Eleanor encouraged gently. Lawrence gazed out the window at the Denver skyline. "Tanya was fearless. Brilliant, as you said, but also deeply compassionate. We met when she was representing a patient of mine who couldn't afford post-surgical care. She won the case." He smiled at the memory. "And then she won me over." The door opened, interrupting their conversation. Cameron Davis entered hesitantly, still in his flight uniform. "I'm sorry to intrude," he began. "The hospital staff said I could find you here." Lawrence gestured for him to join them. "What can we do for you, Mr. Davis?" Cameron sat stiffly on the edge of a chair. "I wanted to check on your daughter. And..." He paused, gathering courage, "to tell you something about Brittany Wells." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "What about her?" "She was fired from United Airlines 8 months ago after multiple complaints about discriminatory treatment," Cameron revealed. "Our airline hired her anyway because they were short-staffed after the pandemic. Several of us have reported concerning behavior, but management hasn't taken it seriously. Why are you telling us this now? Lawrence asked without accusation. Cameron looked down at his hands. My sister has a child Zara's age. When I saw what happened. He shook his head. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Eleanor made a note in her small notebook. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement about these patterns of behavior? Yes, Cameron said firmly. I already told our corporate team I'll be speaking with the airline's HR department tomorrow. They've placed Brittany on administrative leave, but they're already trying to frame this as an isolated incident. It never is, Eleanor commented. Lawrence thought about his own experiences in medicine. How he'd been advised throughout his career to pick his battles, to not make waves, to accept certain indignities as the cost of advancement. He thought about the patients who might have received substandard care because medical professionals like Brittany felt entitled to judge who deserved their best efforts. Mr. Davis, Lawrence said, thank you for coming forward. After Cameron left, Eleanor shared her own experiences with discrimination as a young black woman pursuing law in the 1970s. I was told repeatedly that I didn't belong in law school, that I was taking a spot from someone more deserving. One professor refused to call on me for an entire semester. What changed? Lawrence asked. Nothing and everything, Eleanor replied. The systems didn't change, but individuals within those systems began to stand up. Together. Their conversation was interrupted by Lawrence's phone. Tanya's parents were calling, undoubtedly wondering why he hadn't arrived in San Francisco as scheduled. I should take this, he said apologetically. Eleanor nodded. Of course. I'll check on Zara. As she left, Lawrence answered the call, bracing himself for the difficult conversation ahead. Robert and Lillian Hayes had been distant since Tanya's death, their grief manifesting as resentment toward the son-in-law who survived when their daughter didn't. Lawrence? Where are you? We've been waiting at the airport. Robert's voice carried its usual edge. There's been an incident, Lawrence began, explaining what had happened on the flight. As he spoke, he realized he was sharing more with his in-laws than he had in months, his fear for Zara, his anger at the injustice, his uncertainty about next steps. To his surprise, Robert's tone changed completely. Is she okay? Is my granddaughter okay? She's going to be fine, Lawrence assured him. We're at Denver Children's Hospital. They're monitoring her to ensure the burn heals properly. We're coming, Lillian's voice joined the call. We'll be on the next flight to Denver. The unexpected support from Tanya's parents brought tears to Lawrence's eyes. Perhaps this crisis would begin to heal the rift between them, allowing Zara to know her maternal grandparents after all. After ending the call, Lawrence returned to Zara's room where Eleanor sat beside the sleeping infant. Everything all right? She asked. Actually, yes, Lawrence replied, somewhat surprised by the realization. Tanya's parents are coming to Denver. It might be the first step toward real connection with them. Sometimes tragedy reveals what truly matters, Eleanor observed. Lawrence took a seat beside Zara's crib. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about individuals standing up together. Throughout my career, I've often chosen silence to avoid conflict, to get along in spaces where I was often the only black person in the room. Eleanor nodded in understanding. It's a calculation many of us make. When to speak, when to stay silent. Tanya never made that calculation, Lawrence said with a sad smile. She believed silence in the face of injustice was complicity. A perspective worth considering, Eleanor replied. Lawrence looked at his sleeping daughter, so vulnerable yet so resilient. Before today, I might have accepted the airline's voucher, filed it away as another unfortunate incident in a lifetime of them. For my own sake, I might have stayed silent. And now? Eleanor prompted gently. Now I have to consider what example I'm setting for Zara. What world I'm helping to create for her. Have you ever had to decide between speaking up or staying silent when witnessing injustice? Comment number 1 if you believe silence protects the system that allows discrimination, or number 2 if you think picking your battles is sometimes necessary for self-preservation. Like and subscribe if you believe in standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. How far would you go to create change after experiencing discrimination? The road ahead for Lawrence and Zara will test their resilience in ways they never expected. Denver International Airport buzzed with unusual activity. Word had spread quickly about the emergency landing involving Supreme Court Justice Eleanor Freeman and an injured infant. By the time the medical team had transported Lawrence and Zara to the hospital, airline executives were already in crisis management mode. In Zara's hospital room, a pediatric burn specialist examined the injury while Lawrence watched attentively, asking detailed medical questions. His surgical background allowed him to understand the nuances of treatment options, though he found himself struggling to maintain professional detachment when it was his daughter on the examination table. The good news is that while this is definitely a second-degree burn, it's relatively small in area, explained Dr. Natasha Rivera. With proper treatment, children this age usually heal remarkably well, often without significant scarring. Lawrence nodded, relief washing over him. Thank you, doctor. I understand you're a surgeon. Dr. Rivera asked as she gently applied a specialized dressing to Zara's arm. Cardiothoracic, yes. At Atlanta Memorial. Dr. Rivera smiled. Then you know how resilient the human body can be, especially in children. I'll prescribe pain management and an antibiotic ointment to prevent infection. We'll want to see her again in 48 hours to change the dressing and assess healing. As Dr. Rivera finished her examination, a hospital administrator appeared at the door. Dr. Thompson. There are some people here from the airline who insist on speaking with you. Lawrence exchanged glances with Eleanor, who had remained a steadfast presence. I'll handle this, she offered, following the administrator out. Left alone with Zara, Lawrence took a moment to simply breathe. The events of the day had unfolded with dizzying speed, and he hadn't fully processed everything. He gently stroked Zara's uninjured arm, watching her peaceful sleep with profound gratitude that her injury wasn't worse. His phone buzzed with a news alert. To his shock, the incident was already making headlines: Supreme Court Justice witnesses discrimination on major airline. Social media was exploding with partial accounts, some accurate, others wildly speculative. Eleanor returned 20 minutes later, her expression serious. The airline's regional vice president is here with their legal team. They're offering a significant settlement, conditional on confidentiality, of course. Lawrence wasn't surprised. They want this to disappear. Precisely. Eleanor took a seat beside him. They're particularly concerned about my presence and the optics of the situation. What would you advise? Lawrence asked. Eleanor considered her response carefully. As a Supreme Court justice, I can't provide specific legal advice. But speaking as someone who has witnessed similar situations throughout my career, I can tell you that these immediate settlement offers are designed to prevent systemic change. Lawrence nodded slowly. My mentor in medical school warned me about this. He said institutions would rather pay to silence one incident than fix the underlying problems. Your mentor was insightful, Eleanor commented. Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse announcing the arrival of Vanessa Clark, a prominent civil rights attorney who had seen the news and offered her services pro bono. Eleanor excused herself, recognizing the need for Lawrence to have confidential legal counsel. Vanessa Clark entered with purposeful energy, her keen eyes quickly assessing the situation. Dr. Thompson, I'm so sorry about what happened to your daughter. How is she doing? She'll recover, Lawrence replied, appreciating her immediate concern for Zara. Good. Now, I understand the airline executives are practically camping in the lobby with settlement papers. Lawrence nodded. They're offering a significant amount. They always do in these cases. Vanessa set her briefcase on a nearby table. But I suspect you're not just looking for compensation. No, Lawrence confirmed. I'm thinking about all the times this happens without a Supreme Court justice watching. Vanessa smiled approvingly. That's exactly why I'm here. This incident has the potential to drive real change in airline policies and training. If you're willing to pursue it. While Lawrence conferred with Vanessa, Eleanor was making calls of her own. Her clerk would discreetly gather information about similar incidents across the industry, building context for her transportation discrimination research. Although she would need to recuse herself from any case specifically involving this incident, her broader work on the issue could continue. Meanwhile, at Denver International Airport, the situation was growing more complex. Cameron had been summoned to an immediate meeting with airline executives, who were clearly attempting to control his narrative. To their frustration, he maintained his account of Brittany's pattern of behavior and the management's failure to address previous complaints. Brittany herself had given a tearful interview to a sympathetic airline manager, claiming she was being scapegoated for an unfortunate accident. She portrayed Lawrence as aggressive and unreasonable, suggesting he had overreacted to a minor spill. When questioned about her delayed response with medical supplies, she claimed she hadn't understood the severity of the situation. News crews had gathered outside the hospital, eager for statements from Lawrence or Justice Freeman. Social media was divided, with some commenters immediately understanding the racial dynamics at play while others questioned why everything had to be about race. By evening, Tanya's parents had arrived, their faces drawn with worry. The tension that had characterized their relationship with Lawrence since their daughter's death seemed temporarily suspended by concern for their granddaughter. Lawrence. Robert Hayes extended his hand formally, then surprised his son-in-law by pulling him into an awkward embrace. How is she? She's going to be fine, Lawrence assured them, leading them to Zara's room. Lillian Hayes gasped softly upon seeing her granddaughter, the resemblance to Tanya unmistakable even in sleep. She looks just like her mother, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. Yes, Lawrence agreed gently. She has Tanya's spirit too, resilient and determined. The Hayes' presence provided unexpected emotional support for Lawrence. As they bonded over their shared love for Zara, some of the unspoken grievances between them began to dissolve. Tanya's death had left them all adrift in different ways, but perhaps Zara could be the connection that brought them back together. Later that night, after Tanya's parents had gone to a nearby hotel to rest, Lawrence sat alone with Zara, considering his options. Vanessa Clark had outlined various approaches, from accepting the settlement with conditions for policy changes to pursuing a more public case that could establish precedent for similar situations. His phone continued to buzz with notifications, colleagues from the hospital expressing support, friends asking if the news reports were accurate, and unfortunately, a growing number of racist messages from strangers who had found his professional contact information online. One text message stood out, from Dr. Phillips, his mentor from medical school. Remember what I told you about systems versus incidents. Whatever you decide, know that your choices may affect more than just your situation. Proud of you for standing firm. Lawrence thought about his patients, especially the black children he had treated over the years. How many of them would face similar situations as they grew up? What world was Zara going to inherit? The answer became increasingly clear. This wasn't just about one flight attendant or one airline. It was about accountability in a system that too often allowed such behavior to continue unchecked. When Vanessa Clark returned in the morning, Lawrence had made his decision. I don't want their settlement, he stated firmly. I want change. 2 days after the incident, Lawrence sat in a hotel suite that had become an impromptu headquarters. Zara played contentedly in a portable crib, her injured arm healing well according to that morning's medical checkup. The temporary bandage was smaller now, and she seemed unfazed by the experience that had catapulted her father into an unexpected spotlight. Across the table, Vanessa Clark reviewed documents while speaking on the phone with her paralegal. Justice Eleanor Freeman had departed for Washington after providing her formal statement, but not before connecting Lawrence with several key allies in the legal community. The airline's public statement completely contradicts witness accounts, Vanessa noted after ending her call. They're calling it an unfortunate accident during turbulence and expressing deep concern for Zara's well-being. Lawrence wasn't surprised. Meanwhile, they offered a 7-figure settlement if I sign an NDA. Standard playbook, Vanessa replied. Minimize publicly, maximize the confidential offer, hope it all goes away. The past 48 hours had been a whirlwind. After declining the airline's initial settlement, Lawrence had watched as the story gained national attention. Civil rights organizations had reached out offering support, while medical colleagues shared similar experiences of discrimination during travel. Tanya's parents had become unexpected allies. Robert Hayes, a retired business executive with extensive corporate contacts, had made several strategic calls to board members of the airline's parent company. Lillian, finding purpose in supporting her granddaughter, had organized a small team to manage the logistics of their extended stay in Denver. There's something you should see, Vanessa said, sliding her tablet across the table. The screen displayed a tearful interview with Brittany Wells on a morning news program. I've dedicated my life to customer service, Brittany said, dabbing at her eyes. This was a simple accident during turbulence that's being blown out of proportion. I feel like I'm being persecuted because of political correctness. Lawrence watched impassively. Not surprising. Keep watching, Vanessa advised. The interviewer adopted a sympathetic tone. Some are suggesting racial bias played a role in this incident. How do you respond to that? Brittany's expression hardened slightly before she composed herself. I treat all passengers equally. Race had absolutely nothing to do with this. I think Dar. Thompson is using this unfortunate incident to gain attention. Lawrence raised an eyebrow. Interesting that she knows my professional title now, when on the plane she clearly didn't believe I was a doctor. Exactly, Vanessa agreed. Her story keeps changing. First, it was an accident during turbulence. Now she acknowledges there was an incident with a doctor but claims you're exaggerating. The hotel phone rang, the front desk informing Lawrence that another delivery had arrived. Since going public with his story, he had received hundreds of messages. Some were hateful, requiring the hotel to implement additional security measures. But many more were supportive, including notes from parents who had experienced similar discrimination while traveling with their children. We've confirmed 4 more witnesses willing to give statements, Vanessa continued, reviewing her notes. And Cameron Davis has provided documentation of 3 previous complaints against Brittany that were never addressed by management. What happened to him? Lawrence asked, concerned for the flight attendant who had come forward. Officially, he's on paid administrative leave. Unofficially, the airline fired him for violating their confidentiality policies. Vanessa's expression turned grim. But that's actually good for our case, adds a retaliation claim. Lawrence shook his head, disturbed by how quickly the airline had punished the whistleblower while protecting the perpetrator. It reminded him of patterns he'd seen in medicine, where reporting problems often led to consequences for the reporter rather than solutions to the problems. His phone buzzed with a text from Robert Hayes, CNN wants an interview. Lillian and I think you should do it. The suggestion gave Lawrence pause. Until now, he had limited his public statements to brief, factual accounts. A national television interview would elevate the situation further, bringing more scrutiny but also more opportunity for impact. Vanessa, he asked, what do you think about doing a major interview at this stage? She considered the question carefully. Normally, I'd advise clients to limit public statements during ongoing litigation. But this case is different. Public awareness is actually creating leverage for systemic change rather than just individual compensation. Lawrence gazed at Zara, who was happily gumming a teething toy, blissfully unaware of her role in a national conversation. He thought about Tanya, who had never shied away from using her platform as an attorney to advocate for change. Schedule the interview, he decided. But I want to focus on the pattern, not just our incident. Over the next several days, the case continued to build momentum. Investigative journalists uncovered similar incidents across multiple airlines, revealing a troubling pattern of discrimination that had largely gone unaddressed. Medical experts confirmed that the delay in treatment could have led to more serious complications for Zara, validating Lawrence's concerns about the flight crew's response. In a particularly damaging development for the airline, a technology blog published screenshots from Brittany Wells's private social media accounts, revealing a history of racially charged comments and complaints about difficult minority passengers. The airline's initial defense of Brittany became increasingly untenable as this evidence surfaced. Cameron Davis, though fired, had become a key witness, providing documentation of how previous complaints had been systematically buried by management. His testimony painted a picture of institutional indifference that extended far beyond one flight attendant's actions. Through it all, Lawrence balanced his advocacy with his responsibilities as a father and his commitment to his medical career. Atlanta Memorial had granted him extended leave, with colleagues covering his surgeries and expressing solidarity with his cause. Still, he wondered about the long-term impact on his professional reputation. Would patients or colleagues view him differently after seeing him in this public role? 6 days after the incident, Lawrence sat in another hotel room, this time preparing for his CNN interview. Vanessa reviewed talking points while a makeup artist applied minimal television makeup. Zara was with her grandparents, the relationship between Lawrence and his in-laws strengthening through their shared purpose. Remember, Vanessa advised, they'll try to make this about the settlement amount or about Brittany as an individual. Keep bringing it back to the systemic issues. Lawrence nodded, adjusting his tie. A text message appeared on his phone, from Dr. Phillips, watching tonight. Remember why you became a doctor, to heal systems, not just people. The message crystallized something for Lawrence. Throughout his career, he had focused on healing individual patients, performing surgeries with precision and care. But perhaps his purpose extended beyond the operating room. Perhaps this unexpected platform offered an opportunity to address deeper wounds in society. As the makeup artist finished, Lawrence thought about the promise he had made to Tanya before she died. That he would raise Zara to be brave, to stand up for what was right, to use her voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Tonight's interview was a step toward fulfilling that promise. The producer signaled that they were ready to begin. Lawrence took a deep breath, centered himself, and prepared to tell their story not just for Zara, but for every child who deserved to travel, live, and exist without the burden of discrimination. The grand courtroom fell silent as the judge entered. 6 months had passed since that fateful flight, and now the case of Thompson versus Atlantic Airways had reached its conclusion. Lawrence sat at the plaintiff's table, Vanessa Clark beside him. Zara, now 1 year old, was with her grandparents in San Francisco, having recently celebrated her first birthday surrounded by a community of support that had grown from this challenging journey. "All rise," announced the bailiff as Judge Maria Rodriguez took her seat. The litigation had been exhaustive, with the airline initially fighting every allegation before the mounting evidence and public pressure forced a change in strategy. Brittany Wells had been terminated 3 months into the proceedings after additional complaints surfaced from former passengers. Cameron Davis, though fired for breaking confidentiality, had become a powerful witness whose testimony revealed systemic failures in the airline's handling of discrimination complaints. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, Judge Rodriguez began, "This court approves the consent decree negotiated between the parties." The terms were unprecedented. Atlantic Airways would implement comprehensive anti-bias training for all employees, create an independent review board for discrimination complaints, and establish clear protocols for medical emergencies involving children. The airline would be subject to monitoring for 5 years to ensure compliance. Most significantly, these changes would set a new standard that other airlines would likely follow to avoid similar litigation. Additionally, the judge continued, the court notes the establishment of the Tanya Hayes Thompson Foundation for Transportation Equity, funded by the settlement amount and dedicated to addressing discrimination in all forms of public transportation. Lawrence felt a profound sense of completion as the judge's gavel fell. What had begun as a traumatic incident had transformed into a vehicle for meaningful change. The settlement money had never been his primary concern. Instead, he had insisted on structural reforms and industry-wide impact. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered for statements. Vanessa handled most of the legal questions while Lawrence offered brief comments about his hopes for the foundation named after Tanya. This was never just about one flight attendant or one airline, he explained to the assembled press. It was about creating safer spaces for everyone to travel with dignity, regardless of race, disability, religion, or any other factor that has historically led to discriminatory treatment. Later that evening, Lawrence video called Eleanor Freeman, who had followed the case closely while maintaining the judicial distance her position required. "Congratulations, Dr. Thompson," she said warmly. "Your case has already influenced my recent opinion on transportation accessibility." "I couldn't have done it without your intervention that day," Lawrence acknowledged. "Sometimes justice requires the right witness at the right moment. And the right person willing to stand up," Eleanor added. "Your late wife would be proud of what you've accomplished." The mention of Tanya brought both pain and warmth. Lawrence glanced at their wedding photo on his hotel nightstand. "She always believed in using whatever platform you have to create change." After ending the call, Lawrence packed for his flight to San Francisco the next morning, his first time flying since the incident. The journey that had been interrupted 6 months ago would finally be completed, with Zara meeting her maternal grandparents in their home as originally planned. The relationship with Robert and Lillian Hayes had transformed completely. Their shared purpose in supporting Zara and honoring Tanya's memory had healed wounds that once seemed permanent. Robert had become an unexpected ally in establishing the foundation, leveraging his business connections to secure additional funding and corporate partnerships. Lawrence's professional life had evolved as well. While maintaining his surgical practice, he had accepted a position on Atlanta Memorial's newly formed equity committee, working to address disparities in patient care. The hospital had implemented new anti-bias protocols after Lawrence shared his experiences, creating a more supportive environment for both minority staff and patients. The next morning, Lawrence entered the airport with a mixture of determination and apprehension. Zara, now walking with assistance, held his hand as they navigated security, which proceeded without incident, a small but meaningful improvement. At the gate, Lawrence was approached by a young flight attendant who recognized him. "Dr. Thompson. I just wanted to say that your case has changed how we're trained. We recently completed the new emergency response and anti-bias program. It's making a real difference." Lawrence thanked her, encouraged by this tangible evidence of impact. As they boarded the plane, he noticed subtle differences in how the crew interacted with all passengers, more attentive, more respectful, more consistent regardless of who they were serving. Settled in their seats, Lawrence helped Zara with her seatbelt. She extended her arm toward the window, the small scar from the burn barely visible now but still a permanent reminder of their journey. Dr. Rivera had been right, children's bodies were remarkably resilient, often more so than adults. "Your first real plane ride, little star," Lawrence whispered. "Your mom would be so proud of you." As the plane taxied for takeoff, Lawrence reflected on the past 6 months. The case had never been just about justice for Zara's injury or compensation for their suffering. It had been about creating a world where she would face fewer such incidents in her lifetime, where systems would be more responsive when discrimination occurred, where accountability wasn't the exception but the expectation. A text message arrived from Vanessa, CNN reporting that 2 other major airlines are preemptively adopting similar training programs. The ripple effect begins. Lawrence smiled, watching Zara's fascination with the clouds outside her window. The world wasn't perfect, far from it. Discrimination wouldn't disappear because of one court case or one corporate policy change. But each step forward mattered, each precedent established, each system improved. He thought about all the letters he'd received from parents, doctors, flight attendants, and ordinary travelers sharing similar experiences and expressing gratitude that someone had finally created consequences for behavior too long tolerated. A medical student had written that Lawrence's advocacy had inspired her to continue her education despite facing discrimination. He showed me that we can heal more than just bodies. The flight attendant approached with a warm smile. Can I get anything for you or your daughter, Dr. Thompson? We're good, thank you, Lawrence replied, noting the genuine respect in her tone, not because of his now public profile, but because it was the standard being extended to all passengers. Zara babbled happily, pointing at the clouds as the plane reached cruising altitude. Lawrence kissed the top of her head, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, strengthened by this unexpected journey. Sometimes justice required being in the right place at the right time with the right witness. But more often, it required the courage to stand up when injustice occurred, regardless of who was watching. Lawrence Thompson's journey teaches us that true justice often requires both courage and witness. While discrimination thrives in silence, it withers under exposure. This story reminds us that systems don't change automatically, they change when brave individuals refuse to accept business as usual and demand accountability. What makes this case exceptional isn't just that a Supreme Court justice witnessed the incident, but that Lawrence chose to reject quick compensation in favor of lasting change. He recognized that his daughter's future, and the future of countless others, depended on challenging patterns of discrimination rather than accepting individual settlements. The transformation of Lawrence's relationship with his in-laws also reveals how shared purpose can heal deep wounds. Their collective commitment to honoring Tanya's memory by fighting injustice brought them together when grief had driven them apart. Perhaps most importantly, this story demonstrates that speaking up doesn't just benefit the individual. It creates ripples that extend to others who may never know your name but will experience a better world because you refuse to stay silent. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished someone would speak up? What would you do if you were in Lawrence's position? Comment below with a time you stood up against injustice or share what you learned from this story. If you believe more people need to hear messages about standing against discrimination, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful true stories. Share this video with someone who needs courage to speak up against injustice in their own life. Thank you for joining us on this journey of resilience and transformation. Together, we can create the change we wish to see.